Today I'm going to show you guys how to make this dress. This is my newest pattern release. I call this the Karma dress. It can be made with one slit or two or no slits. Comes in sizes extra small through 3XL. This is available at the link in my bio and comes in AO, A4, and US letter. And it has that deep slit top with a mesh center. I love this dress. Let's get started and I'm going to show you guys how to make this step by step. So you can see I have all of my pattern pieces for the top laid out. This is my main fabric. We're going to exclude that mesh piece. We'll come back to that later. First things first, I'm going to iron on a light to mid-weight interfacing. This is going to give it structure. And we're going to start sewing this side by side. So you can see when I flip this over, I've already added my interfacing. So to start off sewing, we're going to take our center back piece and our back side piece, place those right sides together, pin in place, and sew it down. Once that's done, we're just going to repeat those same steps with our side front, pin in place, and sew down once more. And then finally, we're going to do that with our center front and connect our last piece for this side, pin in place with right sides facing, and then sew down. Once that's done, you should have something that looks like this. We are going to repeat all of those same steps for our other side. Don't connect these at the center yet. We're just going to go side by side first. Now we're going to repeat all of the steps we just did for our lining. So we technically have 4 pieces, 2 lining pieces, 2 main fabric pieces, and we're going to press all the seams for both our main fabric and our lining. And you can use the tailoring ham when you get to those curves, just so make sure everything's nice and flat. Once everything is nice and flat, we are going to start with 2 of our boning pieces. There are 4 total, but we will do the other 2 later on. So first I'm going to measure how long I want this. I want to start about 3/4 of an inch from the top and stop 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, and I'll cut 2 of these. This is going to go right at your seam that connects your center front and side front. And we are going to sew this into the seam allowance. So you can see I want it right at the center, and I'm going to sew it onto each side of my seam allowance. I'll show you what I mean. But when you do it this way, it's an invisible method. So on the outside of your garment, you will not see these seam lines. It is just sewn into the seam allowance, and we'll do that for both sides of our corset. Now we're going to grab our mesh piece and we are going to connect our 2 top pieces. We're going to start doing right sides facing. Place your mesh piece and pin it to one side of your top. Sew that down into place, and then you're going to do the same thing with the opposite side. Something to be very careful of when you're doing this is make sure you're just sewing the mesh onto the other side of your top and not your top onto your other top, your 2 tops together, if that makes sense. So you're only sewing the mesh. They're very, very close together, so you kind of have to move the other one out of the way when you get towards the bottom, but you should just be sewing mesh to the other side of your top, and it will look like this when you're done. Now it's time to add on our lining. So this might be a little confusing if you've never done this method, but we're going to take it really slow. I'm going to take my corset and I am going to fold it. So we're going to go one side at a time. Once I have it folded, I'm going to move one side out of the way, and I'm going to take my lining and I'm going to put this right sides to right sides. This is my right side to the piece that's on the bottom, and we're going to pin all the way around the center that connects at the mesh, and then all the way around the top, making sure that all my seams are aligned. So my seams on my lining and my seam on my main fabric are matching up as I do this. So I have that pinned down, I'm going to sew everything in place. Now we are going to sew this all the way around, but we're going to leave about 1/2 inch off that center bottom. So you guys can see what I mean. I went ahead and included this. This is when it's done. So we have those not connected at the very, very bottom, like you can see there. I wanted to add that in so you guys can see what I mean, because we're going to need those separated when we get back. Once it's sewn, it should look like this. I'm going to trim off some of that seam allowance, and then once I've done this, I'm going to flip it inside out, and I'm going to repeat those exact same steps that we just did for my opposite side. So I'm going to fold my corset in half, and then I'm going to take my other lining, I'm going to pin, and again I'll show you once this is all sewn up what that will look like. And then once that's sewn up, just like we did the other side, we are going to trim off that seam allowance so that it lays a little bit flatter. Now we're going to flip everything right sides out, and I'll show you what your top should look like currently. Now we're going to take our corset and take one side and flip it inside out. You can see I've done that here. And we are going to measure another boning channel that goes from your center to where your mesh meet each other. And I'm going to measure that again 3/4 from the bottom and 3/4 an inch from the top. And I'm going to sew that in to the seam allowance for one side. And I'll show you guys what that looks like when we're done. So here's one side with the boning sewn into the seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing. To do that, we're going to turn one side right side out and then take the other side and turn it inside out so we can get to where our lining is. And we're going to repeat those exact same steps. I'm going to take my other piece of boning and I'm going to sew that into that seam allowance for the opposite side. Now we're going to turn our top completely right sides out and it should be looking pretty good and structured right now. I'm going to press everything down. Make sure this is on a low heat and don't leave it on the mesh because it can melt. I'm also going to do a top stitch right at the top of my corset. You can also do that at the center if you wish. I left it out, so it is optional. Or you can sew down your lining from the inside, however you choose to do that. You just want to make sure everything looks nice and clean. Switch over and set our top aside and we're going to get started on our skirt. So we're going to start off with our two back skirt pieces. You can see I have those here. My main fabric is on the other side. We are going to sew down those darts. You can see I have them marked on the pattern. I'm going to fold these in so that the right sides are facing, pin in place, and then I'm going to sew down, and I'm going to go ahead and do these for both of my back skirt pieces. And once you're done, it should look like this on the right side. Once you've done that, we're going to go one by one with each side. I'm going to grab my side front for the corresponding side. You can see these match up with the right sides facing. I'm going to pin these down all the way down to the very bottom and then sew these up. And I'm going to repeat that for my other side once I've done this. So here's my second side, and I am just repeating those exact same steps that we did for the opposite side and sewing those down. At this time, you're going to have two skirts, your new side pieces, that's actually your side and your back combined. It should look like this. So what we are going to do is we are now going to connect the center to those side front pieces. So you can see I have my slit marked notch, like right where my hand was. You can kind of see it there. This is the side that my slit is going to be on. Decide what side you want your slit to be on. If you want it to be on both or you want no slit, is up to you. I'm only sewing down to that mark. You can see I only pin there and then it's only sewn down to that spot. Now we're going to grab our remaining side, and again I'm going to put that side front with my center and pin these into place. I am not doing a slit on this side, so you'll see I am pinning this all the way down to the bottom. If you're doing two slits, again you'll only stop at that slit notch. And now we're going to repeat those exact same steps for our lining. Everything we just did we will repeat with the lining. This is actually my opposite side, so my slit before was on my right, that is actually my left, and I'm going to be adding on the other side, so my lining has the opposite side slit if you're doing just one slit. This is because when they are right sides facing, we want our slit to be on the same side, and you'll see kind of what I mean when we place those on top of each other so that our slits are on the correct side. And that is the end of your skirt. Now we're going to connect those back to our top. So you can see I have my top, and we're going to do these main fabric, then lining, but just do them one at a time. And I'm taking my main skirt piece here and connecting it to my main top piece here, and I'll show you this like a closer up, but you can see I'm not connecting these two to the lining, and I'm doing right sides facing, making sure all of my seams align nice and neat. And then here you can see this is not connected to my lining. This is why we leave that 1/2 inch off while we were doing our top, because we're only sewing the main fabric to the main fabric and the lining to the lining. So now I'll repeat this exact same step for my lining. So I'm taking my lining and putting it right sides facing, aligning all of those seams, making sure I'm not clipping or pinning any of my main fabric, so that it's just lining to lining, main fabric to main fabric, and we're going to sew those down. Once we have those sewn down, we are just going to trim off all that excess seam allowance for both. Keeping our dress inside out, so our right sides are facing, we are going to close up that slit. So you can either have two of these, one of these, or no of these, and you can skip this part. But with our fabrics right sides facing, we are going to pin or clip all of our slit, and I mean from the very, very bottom all the way up to the top on both sides. And when we sew, we're going to do the same thing. So sew that entire triangle, and once we've got that sewn down, we are going to trim off our seam allowance. Then turn the entire dress right sides out, give it a good press. You can do an understitch or a top stitch, but your slit should look nice and neat. And now we are going to move on to our zipper. Now we're going to get started on our zipper. With my zipper unzipped, I have taken this so that the teeth are facing away from the center back. You can see they were facing the center. Now they're going to face away from the center back, and we are going to pin this just to the main fabric. You can see my lining is kind of out of the way, and we're going to pin this all the way down, leaving a little bit of a tail at the zipper. I like to leave maybe about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. Pin this all the way down and then sew into place again just to the main fabric. Before we do the other side, I like to zip up my zipper, and then I take a piece of chalk and mark where my center waistline seam is, so that way I know that both sides of my zipper are going to be matching up. So now when we do the opposite side, I'm going to make sure that chalk mark matches to the center waist seam on my other side, and we're going to repeat the exact same steps. So I'm moving my lining out of the way because we're just pinning it to the main fabric for now, and I'm going to take my zipper, flip it so that the teeth are facing away from the center back, and I'm going to pin this in place, and again making sure that chalk line matches up with my waist seam. Before you move on, zip up that zipper, make sure everything is looking right, and now we're going to attach our lining to this zipper. So this, we're going to take our lining up, out, and over. You kind of have to almost turn the dress inside out, but we're doing this because we're going to take the right side of the lining and match it to the right side of our fabric, and our zipper teeth are still going to be facing away while they're sandwiched in between this. We're going to pin this in place and then sew down again, leaving about 1 inch of that zipper tail out, and we're going to do this for both sides. I'm doing one at a time because you really have to flip the dress kind of inside out when you sew it down, and then we'll repeat the exact same thing for the other side. But first we're going to flip this right sides out, and I'll show you what it looks like. So now we have our zipper concealed in between the two layers, and it looks nice and neat. Repeating the same thing with our lining for the opposite side. I'm going to take out my lining, flip this so it's kind of inside out-ish, just so that our right side of our lining matches the right side of our main fabric. Pinning this together with the zipper sandwiched in between and the teeth facing away. Then we're going to flip this right sides out and reveal our nice zipper. Zip this up once more and make sure everything is looking right, and then we are going to close up the bottom of this dress. To close up the bottom, I have flipped this inside out. I'm going to pull my zipper, that last end of it, away because I want to get right underneath where my zipper sewing ends, where that kind of line ends. And I'm going to put these right sides facing. This is for my main fabric, and we're going to sew these down. Once I have that sewn down, I'm actually going to do the exact same thing for my lining. Again, when I sew this, I'm going to try to get right under where my zipper ends, so that way we don't have a gap when we're sewing. And we're going to sew these down just like we did the main fabric and finish closing up our skirt. And finally, the very last step, we are just going to hem our dress. You have a couple different options here of hemming these separately or together. So if you want to hem them together, you can do a rolled hem and basically fold these over once with your main fabric and your lining combined, and then fold over once more to conceal all your raw edges. I'm actually not going to hem my main fabric because that main green fabric doesn't need it, but I am going to hem my lining, as you can see here. This is doing it separately, so if you want to hem your main fabric as well, you would follow these exact same steps. And essentially, I am just folding my lining to the inside once, and then I'm going to sew that down, press it, which I didn't film, but then once we've sewn that down once, we are going to roll it over once more and conceal all of those raw edges, and then press so it looks nice and neat. And if you're doing that for your main fabric as well, you'll just repeat those steps. And if anyone is curious about that beaded top and the end result, these are just from Amazon. They're appliques that I sewed on. And that is the end tutorial for how I made this dress. I hope you guys love it. If you make this at home, please feel free to tag me. I love seeing you guys' work. All my @s are Taylor Jean Cox. Also, if you guys have any questions, please let me know, and make sure you subscribe. I'm going to be posting new patterns as well as lots of sewing tutorials.